Hello, welcome. I'm Greg, and in today's episode, we're going to discuss the topics that are hot in terms of the economics and financial sector of the UK economy, especially. So let's get straight into it. So, starting off with a report from the Financial Times, they state that the public sector borrowing hits a second all-time high, and the highest December figure of net borrowing since records began. The rise in the borrowing is because the government is financing people's energy and tremendous cost to service the humongous national debt. In the last 12 months, the government has spent almost the same amount of money on servicing the debt as education. Put that into perspective, the government spends just over £100 billion a year on education. Most in the last 12 months. Almost £90 billion on servicing our national debt, just paying interest to our lenders. So clearly this demonstrates that the cost of borrowing for the government is going to get hit so high. In fact, they're going to be spending more money on paying the interest soon enough than they are spending on the NHS and on pensioners. I really feel as if people don't understand yet the significance of the cost of borrowing for our national debt. People are fine with spending more than what they're receiving, and politicians are, but there's got to be a breaking point. There's got to be a point in the economy in which people realise, hold on, this is getting a bit silly now. We need to stop borrowing completely, and we need to seriously consider reducing our national debt. Reducing our national debt should be the number one priority of governments. Interestingly, the government had to revise their statement on how much they were borrowing, considering the fact that they changed the way in which they measure these student loans has changed, meaning that students will be paying more in future in order to pay back their loans. Which essentially, the way they measure the borrowing, essentially what this does is it lowers the cost for them, but in reality, trickery that they use in order to lower the figure. This theory assumes that students will be paying more of their student loan back, and this isn't even taking into consideration the higher rates of interest that students are currently paying for their student loans. See, here's the problem with the student loans, is that okay, there's a certain threshold in which you start to pay. However, what they fail to mention is the fact that regardless if you're paying it back or not yet, the interest still racks up on your student debt. The principal may not be going up. However, the net amount which will be paid back is increasing. It's been said by many other commentators, however, I feel the need to reiterate this because students who go to university either drop out, retake their year, or when they eventually do graduate from university, their degree is useless. Now over 50% of students from A-level or B.Tech end up going to university. Now if we compare that back into the 80s, it was less than 10% of students, and back then they used a different system. We may ask, why is this? It's because they used a different system. Now, students don't think about the consequences of paying back their student loans. They just think, oh yeah, I'll go for 3 years and I'll have some fun, and I don't have to pay it back unless I'm earning over a certain threshold, and I end up probably won't be paying it back over the 30 or 40 years I have to pay. It just works as like an extra tax, people will think. People don't think of it as an actual debt. That's the issue. In the mid-80s, the system that they used back then was pay as you go. You paid the fees as you went through university. There was no student loan, so you'd have to pay for your rent, your food, and your education as you went along, and people were able to do this. There was no need for what is essentially a fictitious mortgage after you graduate university. Not only that, the taxpayer picks up the bill for all of these students who don't bother to complete university or don't have the earnings to eventually pay the student loan off. The idea of giving students money knowing that from their degree, their career choices are unlikely to pay off the student loan is ridiculous. There's no private organisation, someone provides you with a loan in which they'd say, okay, you've got no income, no savings, no nothing. Well, okay, and what is your career? Oh, okay, we'll provide you here with a £400,000 loan. There you go. In fact, they probably wouldn't even give you a £10,000 loan, let alone 40, 50, 60 grand for student finance. And the idea behind this is, oh, we're improving human capital. I don't think we are, by having people do degrees that are not useful to their career choices. Because universities get all this guaranteed money by the government, that the unis are doing things such as expanding their campuses, and they're teaching all types of Mickey Mouse degrees that they didn't used to do back in the 70s and 80s. If the government got out of the system, people seem to think that only the rich kids would be able to afford to go because the parents would pay for the £9,200 fee on the education. However, this is not the case, because not many people would be able to afford to do this, and the universities thrive on filling in the seats at universities. Therefore, they would be forced to cut costs and cut fees. These areas of cost cutting would be in areas that are unnecessary departments that don't add any real value to the students that attend. Not only that, students would see the real cost up front of going to university, and more of them might consider not going. This might be a bit of a reality check for many students, which is what they need. More students should be doing on-the-job training, more to improve human capital. More real-life experience through apprenticeships are necessary for so many students. And not only is it necessary, it's beneficial to their future careers because they learn what they earn. You see, the main problem with the current system is that universities don't actually care how well their students do and how beneficial the course actually is to them, because all that matters to them is that they're getting paid and that more and more students are coming in and into their university. That's all that matters, because they get guaranteed money by the government for every student that goes to university. The government will give the university funding, and guess who's on the hook for students' loans? Not universities, it's the government, it's the taxpayer that's on the hook. That's why there's no incentive for universities to push important degrees over and only teach important degrees, simply because they get guaranteed money by the government for every student. All they care about is getting more and more students in. That's why they include more crappier and crappier degrees that they know are not going to improve human capital. And the students don't care because they get to spend more time not working, essentially, not working a full-time job, and they get to sit around and party and drink alcohol. Now, moving on to a different headline, the Bank of England has warned insurers about their ability to sell assets in the event of crisis. Now, this doesn't come to any surprise, because recently, about 5 months ago, there was the shock that happened with the pensions in the UK after the budget of Liz Truss, in which the pensions almost collapsed, essentially, raising doubts over their ability to sell assets in a crisis. And this comes to no surprise to me, because the Bank of England are sure as hell terrible at this kind of stuff, because it's only now that they're warning about insurers and pension funds, their ability to sell assets in the event of a crisis now. Why were they not saying this beforehand? Why were they not saying this 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago? Why now? It seems a little too late after they had to intervene 5 months ago. Now, turning our attention to the biggest headline that everyone's talking about, is Naheem Zahawi should have recorded a £27 million sale in a firm. It really surprised me how they responded, because they said that they understand it was quite possibly a mistake, and it probably was a mistake, and there was no tax evasion. Now, they're either complete fools, or there's some sort of cooperation going on here. There's some sort of inside deal in which, because he was a minister and he was the minister for HMRC, it would look rather embarrassing that they admit what went wrong. HMRC can be clowns, however, in this instance, I strongly don't believe they are this clownish. Okay, they're not this much of a fools. My issue with this isn't the fact that he didn't report these earnings. It's the fact that he got a slap on the wrist, essentially, is what it amounts to. Because if it was any other individual, they have so many disputes with HMRC, and the amount of times which people may have misreported earnings of a few £1,000s maybe at most, and they get massive fines and they go to prison sometimes. The maximum sentence for someone committing tax evasion is up to 7 years in prison. When I first heard about this situation with Zahawi's taxes, it didn't really surprise me and I didn't think it was much of an issue, considering the fact that, okay, he's put this business and this family trust in a different country, to avoid tax. A lot of people do that. A lot of businesses do this to avoid tax. It's not that big of a deal. However, I learned that he made a deal with HMRC whilst he was Chancellor to pay over £2 million in tax that was due months and months before. I mean, in reality, we shouldn't be surprised, because this kind of stuff happens all the time in politics. It's nothing new. It happens in all countries. It's just a matter of whether it gets exposed or not. It's like with the MP situation that happened over a decade ago with their personal allowance. Sorry, excuse me, not allowance. I'm talking about their expenses on both the left and the right. The biggest concern should be politicians earning money through bribes of private companies to give them favourable results and favourable adjustments to allow them to make it more difficult for the competitors to enter the market by raising the barrier to entrance for most businesses through different types of legislation.